Today's episode is about becoming the love you never got. I'll start off with a personal note. I grew up feeling like everything I did was never enough. I was the one who would hold it all together, who was parentified, and also being minimized when I needed support and feelings were just not welcomed. And so that trained me to hand my overgiving to takers. And I was hyper independent and vigilant. I kept attracting people who would drain me because that pattern felt familiar. And I'd give until I was empty. And at times I would ask for reciprocity, feeling terrible doing so. And it turns out that that was a tall order, especially for the friends and connections who only expected my endless capacity and never offered their own. But they would look at me and see a woman who was financially successful, a healthy marriage, and just a successful life overall. And that was a green flag to stay in my orbit because they could benefit off of my childhood wound of overgiving. But I knew that cycle had to end with me. It was my responsibility to break it. I wasn't here for any blame or shame. And if I'm not clocking the vampires, how am I supposed to give myself what I always needed from other people? And that is the part that not very many people will tell you, is that self-love is not easy when you have been conditioned to feel guilty for choosing yourself. But when you choose to heal from this, you learn to track the places you leak energy. You learn to stop trying to earn care, love, support, kindness, and pure relational reciprocity. Nobody is going to give you the love you should have had. Nobody is arriving to patch the wounds left by neglect, dismissal, or inconsistency. And nobody can repair the emotional blueprint you were handed except for you. And when you have to face this truth, it is incredibly brutal. And then it becomes the beginning of your freedom and your peace. People spend years trying to heal outwardly. They chase approval like it is oxygen. They treat validation like a vending machine. And they look for partners who can soothe the ache of everything they were missing. They look for friendships that they feel like emotional rescue missions. And then they search for someone who finally says the words they needed to hear decades ago. But the healing does not start there. It starts the moment you decide to become what you spent your whole life waiting for. The love you never got, the attunement you were denied, and the safety that you created alone, as well as the patience that you had to beg for, and the support that you had to live without. Becoming that for yourself is the beginning of real self-love, not the self-help version, but the cellular, grounded, lived-in version that changes how you move in relationships and how you treat and talk to yourself. When you start meeting yourself the way others failed to meet you, you stop using people like bandages. You stop trying to get relief from sources that were never capable of giving it. And you stop trying to turn romantic partners into emotional parents. And you especially stop expecting friends to fill the voids created by your own past. You will then start healing from the inside out. And that is where the real shift begins. It's slow at first, and then all at once, you start regulating your own nervous system. You're reconditioning it and retraining it. And instead of outsourcing your stability, you're able to create that for yourself. You start validating your own experience instead of checking to see if other people will agree with you. And then you start seeing the difference between love and familiarity. And that means you stop choosing people who feel like home when home was unsafe. You start recognizing emotional breadcrumbs for what they are instead of convincing yourself that this is as good as it's going to get and this is the whole meal. And this isn't about becoming hyper independent. Hyper independence is trauma wearing a cape. This is about finally giving yourself the emotional nourishment you begged from other people for. And now you get to give it to yourself, not because you don't need other people or connections, but because you finally stop needing somebody else to save you. When you learn to give yourself the love that you never got, every relationship in your life will change. Your standards shift and your sensitivity to disrespect increases. Your tolerance for inconsistency also drops and your boundaries sharpen without becoming rigid. You're no longer impressed by the bare minimum because you've raised the emotional floor inside of yourself. So you become your own baseline. And that internal baseline is what changes your dating patterns, your friendships, your partnerships. And it's not manifestation, it's nervous system alignment. You attract what you are, not what you pretend to be. So if you're chaotic inside, you will attract chaotic connections. If you're lonely inside, you will attract people who only keep you lonely. And if you're starving for validation and approval, you'll attract people who feed you crumbs. If you're unhealed, you'll attract relationships that highlight your unhealed parts. And when you become the love you never got, you attract people who meet you at the same emotional altitude, people with self-awareness, people with growth and capacity, and people who can communicate and take accountability instead of turning everything into a blame game. People who don't need you to translate your pain into a language that they can understand because they speak it too. Healing creates compatibility where you can match reality instead of trying to match energy and effort. And here's a part that people will often miss. When you become everything you expect to receive, you also become quicker at seeing what doesn't align. Red flags stop looking like challenges that you need to fix, and they stop feeling like invitations to prove your worth. They stop registering as potential, and you see them clearly. Your body also reacts a lot faster, and your boundaries activate sooner. You're just calibrated at this point. You're not being cold or selfish. And when you trust yourself, you actually really trust your instincts. You don't override your discomfort to keep somebody around. You don't abandon yourself to maintain the connection, and you don't contort yourself into becoming shapes that don't fit. You don't ignore your intuition because you're afraid of being alone. And then you stop choosing people based on chemistry and you start choosing them based on compatibility. Compatibility isn't about shared hobbies or interests. It's about shared emotional maturity and expansion and involvement. It's a shared willingness to grow and a shared self-awareness and the capacity to repair, as well as having shared responsibility. This is the place where healing stops being internal work and becomes relational wisdom. You stop using relationships as escape routes from your childhood wounds, and you stop reenacting trauma loops hoping they'll end differently. You stop waiting for someone to do what you've never done for yourself, which means you stop chasing versions of love built on survival instead of true intimacy. Becoming the love you never got means becoming emotionally available to yourself, like the support you always needed and the safe place you were denied, and being honest with yourself in ways that nobody taught you, and being the one who doesn't abandon you when things get hard. It also means facing grief of everything you didn't receive, the grief of realizing how long you went without emotional nourishment, the grief of facing your unmet needs without numbing out, and the grief of breaking patterns that once kept you alive. But the grief isn't the end. It is the clearing. That is clearing emotional clutter for you. And on the other side of grief is someone you've been trying to become your entire life. The version of you who is emotionally rooted, self-honoring, aware, respecting, and connecting. A version of you that no longer assigns other people the job of saving you. A version of you who will attract real partnership instead of rescue missions. And you can see the red flags quickly because you're no longer responsible for fixing what isn't yours. You will stop begging, chasing, settling, shrinking, and reenacting all the old stories because you start living from a place of emotional truth. And healing is a moment you choose yourself where others failed. Growth is what happens when you stop running from that choice.